This is Black Money.
About economic liberation and freedom.
Critical conversations to invigorate our communities through Black-led CDFIs.
But most importantly, we want people to create wealth.
When we look at our communities, we still see a big disinvestment.
Going from resourceful to resourced.
CDFIs have that high touch. They understand their customers. They know how to reach out to those customers. They stay in touch with those customers.
We are trying to create job makers and not just job takers.
Yeah, I've even heard it said recently that great leaders don't lead from the top down, they lead from the bottom up because they're actually lifting everybody.
We have to do more than just being a regular lender.
Don't give me this story about if I teach you how.
Hey, LinkedIn. Good to be here with you. Justin Minott from the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. Now, before we get into intros here, I got Angela backstage, my colleague, and I just got to say this so that Angela can, hold me accountable, man. I'm so glad after watching that trailer that I found a good barber. Because my beard looked like a bushman in these something. Angela laughing backstage. It just looked like this big old, I'm just so glad. So shout out to Mills, getting my life together. And I'm here with Michael Jeans, the president and CEO of Growth Opportunity Partners. Incredible, man. Now look how sharp he is. I literally ironed my shirt for this interview just to make sure, because you can't be showing up next to Michael Jeans. And Angela looking at me like, don't say the next part that I said. But anyway, we're good. We're here. We're good. Praise the Lord that I have restraint, and it's good. Michael, good to be with you today.
Always good to be with you, Justin.
Yeah, man. So now, we love narrative. We love getting into story, and your journey has been an incredible one leading up to the life-changing work that you're doing at Growth Opportunity Partners. Give us the making of Michael Jeans.
Wow, sure. That's well, first off, thank you and the Alliance, CEO Linwood Long and Amber, the team, for inviting me. And certainly you have just been amazing in this work. So thank you for that. I recognize that my story is a shared story, and it's probably not too dissimilar from a lot of people who are on today. But my story starts back to my greats. Right. And through to my grandparents, but they had a way of conducting themselves and pushing themselves with me in mind, right? Not knowing who I would be named, but with my grandchildren in mind. And so that becomes the anchoring part of my story. My mother, dated my father from 7th grade on. They got married, and 4 years later, I'm 4 years old, and they divorced, and 3 of us went out west and 2 of us came back. But my mom was a lioness, like so many of our moms, right? It's not the lion that's doing the hunting. It's not the lion that's watching out for the little ones. It's the lioness. And that was my mom. And so I had these examples from my grandfather, a steel worker, to my grandmother, who was an entrepreneur in the 60s. As a medical transcriber, all for the sake of family. And so, if the question is kind of what is my story, it started with Tubman, it started with Douglas, it started with King and with Malcolm and with Sojourner Truth and Garvey and Evers. And frankly, fast forward to Linwood Long. These are folks who are selfless in the work, in their actions. They make decisions, and then they take action on those decisions, so that we can be better, so that our descendants can be better. I've had opportunities and I've had them taken away. There's been something to learn in both of those. What I'd like to see is a chance that when we as Black folks don't necessarily hit the mark of perfection, although we might have that pursuit, that we get an opportunity to give it another shot.
Yeah, I love it. I love your story. Now, tell us how you got involved with the current work that you're doing. Give us this current landscape as well.
Sure. I started my career in accounting and investments, and then in banking. And in each of those stops, I learned a tremendous amount. One of the things I observed is that I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me, either in leadership and executive leadership, where they had P&L responsibility. And I didn't see a lot of us as clients. Yet I knew that we could perform and exist in both of those places as both the client and the executive. So I would moonlight a little bit. For my day job, I'd spend my time in the evenings in the neighborhood trying to just share everything I was learning at the same time, so that we were all learning at the same time. But I was also learning from my folks. What's real, what's really happening on the ground where you are. I'm next door, but help me understand you. And all of that, I believe we were able to pull together to create Growth Ops. So I can no longer blame someone else's credit policy. I can no longer blame somebody else for not promoting the most qualified person and not giving us a shot. I can't blame the HR team for not bringing in African American youth in our internships. That's the stuff I have to put in motion. And so the goal was to create an organization that maybe couldn't manage risk better than traditional banks, but we look at our folks with a benefit of the doubt. And one red mark doesn't define, because it doesn't define other folks. I don't know why it should define us. And I take great joy getting up in the morning knowing that my kids might interact with one of our clients or someone who knows we dropped everything to give them a chance. We don't do favors, right? We give folks what they deserve, which is a fair shot. And so that's what brought me to creating Growth Ops. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary.
Come on now.
Really excited about that. And in 2020, we created the first African-American-led green bank in the country, some folks say in the world. And so as we think about technology and innovation, and you and I have been walking this together, we need to look around a couple of corners, 2 or 3 corners, and see what's over there and what should we have a bite of, and then walk that back and prepare our organizations and our people so that we can take advantage of it.
I love your journey. I'm seeing some great love in the chat as well. Thank you so much. And make sure if you're tuning in here, let us know who is in the digital building, because we love doing this together. That's why we do it live instead of a pre-recorded thing, as we want this. And you got Michael Jeans here, so ask some good questions as well. So, Michael, give us more of a sense of what Growth Ops is currently doing in terms of its portfolio. Walk us through what that really looks like on the day-to-day and what type of loans you're doing, all that type of work.
Sure. So when we started, we began with a lending platform. And frankly, I think at that moment or those moments, that was all the market could really bear. So we said, okay, we know lending. I'd been in banking for over 20 years and built out a team. We can do that. But the reality is, I did not want to be in economic development, focusing on disadvantaged and underserved communities. And the only tool we had was indebtedness. Like, let that sink in for a moment, right? And so as we approached the pandemic, there was a federal opportunity for a payment protection plan, I believe it was. And as it was being drafted, we quickly recognized our communities will not see the full benefit of this, not much of it at all. And we wrote the Fed Reserve, and we did not see that dial move. And so when it was enacted, we saw that companies that were not led by people of color or African Americans, they were getting the preponderance of the capital. And at that point, my board was kind enough to agree that we were going to take a pause on debt. And we began issuing grants to our clients and to our prospective clients in our target market. And we didn't need a return on that, right? So, I think the other piece to this equation is we are not going to profit off of, we're not going to hit our bottom line on the backs of those who have been disadvantaged, right? And so if we net even, that's fine with us. If I take a short-term loss for a long-term gain, that's fine. That's an investment in the work. And so we've got grants, we've got the lending piece, we've got investing. And then with the clean energy work, which has been challenged by a new administration, it's designed to, and we were approved for $156 million, a little bit north of that, to grant $156 million into disadvantaged communities. Again, we'll make the money elsewhere, but what we've learned is if it starts somewhere else and we're relying on trickle down, we may as well pack it up, right? But if it starts here, then even those who believe in trickle down have to believe it'll make it to their communities. But we start in the disadvantaged community. And if there's something to it, we do our jobs, then entire communities benefit, but entire communities cannot benefit if we're left behind.
So true. Now, how do you balance practically this give first mentality with organizational sustainability, right? Because I think for a lot of big hearted leaders who want to be involved in their community, want to make a big difference, understand that, debt capital is not the only way to move the needle. How does that really work practically for Growth Ops? Because you're doing it well, you're running a really beautiful organization. Give us some of the nuts and bolts of that for people that are trying to figure this out.
No, I appreciate that. Look, when we only had a debt model, then that was the only income we had, right? And so let's recognize that we may not finish where we start. The midterms may, we may be in a different situation. And so initially we only had the lending platform, but as we built that out, we began to build out different products. So no different than a large corporation. And for all the small business owners and advisors to small business owners, there's not a large company that didn't start out as a small business. They didn't start out as an idea. And today they may have multiple lines of businesses and lines of business and multiple products. Some of those, and you've heard it in retail, some of those might be a loss leader. Well, you got to believe in the thing. You got to believe in who you're serving. If you're going to take that loss in that area, if you don't believe in those folks, then there's not an appetite or a will to give up profitability. But then there are other areas where you can make your money. And so at a time in this country's history when diversity is under assault, it's well accepted in corporations. It's well accepted in financial modeling. That's how we can get to the kind of bottom line that we need to arrive at. And frankly, we don't need to just serve one population, because I need other populations of ethnic groups. I need them to see people of color performing as much as I see as our people see us performing, because I need their kids to be comfortable working for mine, right? And so as we think about how this works, the more time we spend together, and we spend it in earnest, right? It's genuine. Then we're going to see what I think we're seeing at Growth Ops now. We have a diverse group of students who come in every summer as interns, and I love seeing these young folks get together. Their backgrounds are different, and they're a little uncomfortable at first, but it doesn't take long for them to see themselves in each other. And the variety of younger folks who come up to me and my team and say, "What do I need to do to intern here? Are you hiring?" Right? That's when we're on to something. And I think our people have been on to something for a long time. That's why they keep trying to take it away.
That's exactly right. That's interesting. Actually, it brings up a point. We were talking on the pregame show. Angela was with us and talking about some of these big advances that Black people have made, even here in the United States, like building up an incredible ecosystem in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then all of a sudden it gets burnt down or whatever happens, or here in Durham, you put a Highway 147, for example, right through the heart of what was a thriving Black community. I mean, so many different ways that monster has reared its head. And I think we take it as a discouraging thing, right? Because it's so devastating. But I wonder if we took it as a clue, like, wait a minute, if they're trying to actually destroy this, maybe we have something here. Maybe there's something that we need to keep leaning into instead of being discouraged and getting away from it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's spot on. And I think there are two sides to that barbell. One is, if there's such an effort to prevent us from voting, there's probably a lot of value there. If there's such an effort to prevent us from being president, then there's probably a lot of power there. The other side of that barbell, if it's easy for us to attain it, the value's probably already moved on, right? We're being sold as if it's today's innovation and opportunity, but it's likely yesterday's, because power doesn't give, it's just not given up, right? And so to recognize that, then we can start to look at what's the cycle, right? I'm an economics guy, I'm a finance guy. But what's the cycle of things? And we've seen this cycle before. There's not a cycle of Black history or African Americans or people of African descent who have not performed. There, however, is a cycle that once we do, and once it's noticed and it's pervasive, it's taken away. To your comments, it's burned down. There's an eminent domain. There's a highway that's put through it. It's not that we don't perform. It's that when we do, other folks get uncomfortable. And
Mm.
and so one of the things you and I talked about previously is we've allowed ourselves to believe a set of things that just aren't true. You know, we're in
Mhm.
the United States, and you know, we're referred to as minorities. And when I look over my shoulder, I hear someone else saying about themselves, about ourselves, that we're minorities. 85% of the world's population is people of color.
Right, right.
Right?
Ain't no
Like,
minority here. We
yeah,
major.
yeah. You know,
Yeah.
we're not descendants of slaves. We were enslaved. Let's put this in the
Yeah.
right context when we're talking about ourselves. And so, what I would like to see us do in the spirit of that is, you know me, my flight reflexes are not that good,
Mhm.
and so I don't believe the African American needs to flee, but I do believe, whether you're a person of faith or not, that there's a much larger thing that is accessible to us. This world is large, more accessible to some than others. And we've been fragmented, not because one moved away from the other, but we're just not proximate to each other and how we think about each other and how we look for opportunities. When we think about the village, when we talk about the village, mentally that village is proximate.
Mm.
We should be contemplating uh, a portability of a village. We should be contemplating joining others in places that can cultivate. I've got gardens in the backyard. I'm not the best gardener, but I know some things require a certain amount of sunlight, and some botanicals require a certain amount of water and a certain level of acidity. But there are things that are consistent about cultivation, and I think, are shortchanging ourselves if we limit ourselves to this one place that consistently hasn't been so good to us.
I agree. And I do believe, I mean, business, for one, is a global sport. It's becoming increasingly so. It is not a local sport, but also connecting to other Black folks around the globe in ways that are economically advantageous for everyone in partnerships, I think is one of the next big waves. And frankly, I just keep saying this on, on a few lives here. This is one of the core ideas that finally got Malcolm X actually taken out. Like, he was revolutionary on a lot of fronts, and he was talking about Black love and Black power. He started, just before he got taken out, collaborating with the continent, with a lot of leaders over there, and starting to figure out how Black Americans can connect with Black people from across the globe. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, whoa. Like, that's because the actual economic power, we are not a minority. We're playing this game small over here with, what do you say, we're 12% of the population in the United States, right? And we're looking at that and all the systems of oppression that happen here. But if we just back out, expand out our view a little bit, all of a sudden we're playing in the driver's seat. This is not some subservient thing. And so I think about all the ways that white supremacy has been internalized by the Black community, right? Through colonialism, through, white patriarchy, all of these different things that have been passed down as dominant narratives that keep people small. And that, to me, is the issue, right? Is the ways that we're playing a game that we don't even need to be playing.
That's right.
It's like, we don't
That's
even need to be playing with y'all over here. Like, this is not right. You have the blessing of interacting with us, not that we have the blessing of having a seat at your table. Is like, that's crazy to me that it's gotten flipped to that.
Look, and to that point, right? Like the seat of the table, get it, got it, right? Like, but at some point, we need to take a step back, look up, and say, "Am I even in the right house?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, the table conversation is the fundamental, but are we in the right place? Right? Who's the host? What did they put in the food?
Right.
Right? If we just
Did
think
they
these
put raisins
things,
in the potato salad? Like, is that?
you got to think them all the way through, right? And power is a dynamic thing, right? Power is like fire. When it's managed, when it's controlled, it can produce heat and warmth and provide food. But when it's out of control, it consumes everything, right? We just saw that in California. And so as we think about power and how it's being utilized across the globe and here, think about this. Slavery was legal. Colonization was legal. Apartheid was legal in South Africa. Lynching was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Taking our ancestors' homes was legal. and assaults on Black bodies over time has been legal.
Redlining was legal.
Legal, and deed restrictions, right? And so, again, we have been able to be a most resilient people. I want us to get from. I remember seeing a document where W.B. Du Bois and a couple of others, were hosting some meetings over the summer, and it was surviving in America because that's what we needed. And unfortunately, we're still surviving as a people. And if one of us is still surviving, all of us are still surviving.
Yeah.
I want us to get to a place where we are cultivated, and when we do excel, that it's in a place that deserves it. It's with people who deserves it. And I want to be very clear. I'm not anti-United States. I had to distinguish that. I almost said America, but the Americas stem from Canada to South America, right?
Right.
Like, this country's just arrogant enough to call it, like we're American. I'm not anti the United States, but there has to be a risk reward that makes sense. And that should apply to all people. And so I just get back to the math and the economics and decency. We will not be a great nation unless we include everyone. We can't participate in a global economy unless we look at more than just ourselves inward. We're not looking for any favors and any handouts. We are overqualified so many times. And so then the things that we talked about that were legal, but were still atrocities, those are traumatic. And I imagine some people on the phone have experienced some of the traumas of being a person of color and in the United States. And then you're re-traumatized, on a regular basis. And there are triggers that happen. I guess what I'm saying is I'm unwilling to accept a diagnosis of helplessness. And I think a lot of us are. I knew I couldn't be best friends with poverty. Conditions and situations can make that easier for some to say than others at different points in our lives. And so how do we lift one another when it's needed? Because we're going to need to be lifted at some point again. And if we can do that collectively, and we can do that without dividing, all these categories, what your religion and your faith is, and where you live, and how much money you make, and skin color, and whatever the things are, we can just start to knock the nonsense out of the room. Man, we can do even greater things together and without boundaries.
I love that. Go deeper on that. What does that take to actually knock the nonsense out of the room, right? Because we can say, okay, we've identified it, right? What does it take to actually move the needle on that front? And I'm talking from like a heart narrative, all of these things that really become ideas, become action, right? But there's stuff that's deeper. How do we get to that, Michael? Because that's the issue of the day.
We used to spend more time talking about the things that matter. And sometimes those were what we called in-house conversations, right? It was around the kitchen table. It was my family having the conversation about if I get pulled over, not recognizing the stress that Black moms carry for their husbands and for their brothers and their sons. And I don't know, I think we still have the kitchen table conversation. We have the in-the-house conversations, but we've been fragmented in a way that we're not necessarily having enough conversation about the things that matter. I remember a time when if we saw someone assaulting us, you pulled over, you stopped, you asked questions. We gave each other benefit of the doubt. And again, we still do some of this, but I'm not seeing us doing as much as we could. And so this begins before anybody else can love us, we've got to love ourselves. Right. But I can't ask you to do something for my people that I don't feel, not because I'm paid for it, but because I actually believe it. And so I think that's the baseline. Then secondly, we need to have these conversations because each of us has varied experiences. Some have traveled abroad. Some have only been a few blocks from where they grew up, right? One doesn't guarantee necessarily a particular outcome. But when you put us together, it can start to shape how we see ourselves. And if we can see ourselves in something that's not only our backyard, that's not so proximate, so parochial as we call it, but that we see ourselves in the fullness of what's possible, then I think I think we can start to pull the levers that we need to. We can think bigger. When we think about our small business, we already see it as a Fortune 500. But the being in this pressure cooker is almost designed for you not to see it, right? That's why we keep seeing these cycles. And I don't want us to, just because we don't get it perfect doesn't mean we're forever broken, right? And just because we look across the way and we see somebody else doing something that we've at our age or stage in life have recognized, like, that's not it, doesn't mean they're broken. Um, there's no Japanese story saying about a warrior named Kintsugi, and as the saying goes, and I'll be quick, that he had a love for pottery, and he had gone off to war to battle, and when he came back, his favorite vase had been fractured. It'd been broken, and he took it to the person he was told to take it to have it fixed, and it took a long time to get it fixed. When it finally came back, it was a mess. You could see where the cracks were, pieces were missing. And he was approached another time because he was so vocal about his displeasure, and so he took it to a master craftsman, and it took a bit more time as well. But when it came back to Kintsugi, you could still see where the fractures were, but it had been filled in a type of metal that made the broken places stronger than they were before it had ever been broken. Right? That's seeing what's possible, but that wasn't possible if he hadn't interacted, he being Kintsugi, with the potter, right? And so we need to see ourselves not as broken, but capable of anything. And what we can do together is unmatched. And I think that's why there's been such an assault on us. But pull us back together. Let me say that a different way. Let's pull ourselves back together. I'm not a bootstrap guy. But this is what we've done well, right? This is what we know. We don't need anyone outside to tell us how to do this part of it. But there's a lot in the world that we can learn, and the beginning of it has to be a little grace for each other.
Yes. I heard it said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so I think that is where we sit from, right? Is we get to actually create this future. And I do think, Michael, that it starts with changing some of the narratives about how we see some of the fragmentation, even how we see some of what has happened historically in this place. Could there be opportunities for us that have been created because of, not in spite of, what was deemed broken? And I'm just hearing that story and how this pot had an opportunity to become stronger because it was broken. Not in spite of its brokenness, right? That if you take that and reimagine what's possible, I think there are way more beautiful futures available for Black people. Like, the future has Black people in it, and we're thriving. We're thriving. Now, how we get there, I think, is the interesting piece. But even just starting from that point, that like the future has Black people in it and we're thriving, that lets you imagine some ways forward, even in this fragmented society and all the ways that folks have tried to keep Black people down. So, anyway, keep cooking on that.
I was just gonna. I think I like where you're headed, right? We're the most inclusive people I can find, right? Like, we're always trying to build the bigger tent. We're always saying we're better together, it hasn't always been returned to us in that form, but we're an inclusive people, and so I say that to say, whites are not our enemy, right? Asians are not our enemy. Latinos are not our enemy. There's not a future, and we all have to grasp this. The entire globe has to grasp this. And frankly, we're hearing this from Europe now, as they're hearing from the United States some language that's anti-immigrant and anti-DEI. And Europe, just in the German elections this week, has said that's not us, right? We're just a few hours from Northern Africa. We're proximate to the Middle East, and the UK is just across the way. So there's natural diversity there, and you have to include it, or you're not going to perform. And so I want to be very clear. There's not a future that's all Black. Look, I don't have a crystal ball, right? But it's not a future that's all singular. That toothpaste is out of the tube. There's a future for a lot of good to be done, and there's a future where you can do good and do well, right? And so in the spirit of kintsugi, when we have that vase put back together so that it's stronger than it's ever been, it can't be just for my consumption and my family's consumption. It's got to be like our ancestors who thought about us, right? I'm only here because my ancestors and I agree that both our unborn and born descendants deserve to be a priority. And so how we move and operate needs to contemplate that. We've got to get to the point where, and it's not easy. I don't want to be dismissive in any stretch. I've had and I haven't had, and then I've repeated it, right? But we got to get to the point where we're planting trees under whose shade we'll never sit. That's from a business perspective. That's from a savings perspective, asset attainment. That's from a place perspective. Did the children have passports? Right? Do they have that passport to freedom so that wherever it may be, they can vacation there, they can do what they need? And it's easy to say it, but then what are the steps to get there? That's what I want to talk about after this call, right? I hope you all email me at michael.jeans@growthops.org. I hope you email the Alliance, Justin and the team there, because they've got even more antennas out throughout our communities, because it's the what's next that's always there. To your point, no matter how dark it is in one place, if you've flown or driven anywhere long enough, you'll see the change of season. We, I think, need to just become a little more limitless.
This is beautiful. I love this discussion. So I want to hear now about some of the climate justice work that you're doing. That's a big piece of what's going on for the planet, and also here in the United States. And, there's some opposition going on. As much as you're allowed to, can share right now, can you lean into, first of all, why? Why'd you want to even get involved and have the foresight to be involved in the world of economic climate justice?
Sure. So a couple of reasons there. One is communities of color have borne the brunt of carbon emissions, which means our health and well-being has been adversely affected and we didn't know it. We have more dumping grounds than other places. Our air quality isn't what it could be, and that's a function of representation, right? There wasn't somebody who cared enough about us to say, no, not in our backyard. And over time, we have then seen the adverse health consequences. And so my team began to just kind of look under the hood a little bit to see what's causing some of these health consequences. And frankly, we saw a through line across low income. So it wasn't necessarily a ethnicity scenario, although there were some correlations there, but those were secondary and tertiary. Yeah. It was income, it was assets. And in those places,
which here equals power,
which here equals power, which here equals influence, right? Those places would later find higher cancer rates, lead poisoning. Folks didn't even know lead was in the house, right? And so we just wanted to get to the bottom of it. We would see people clinging to carts in grocery stores with appendages, lower legs that were inflamed. But why is that? It's not because of who they are or how they were born. It's something else. And so that caused us to dig deeper. And what we recognized and learned from talking to some of the folks in healthcare and otherwise is that environment cultivates life. And we weren't seeing a level of care and attention being placed on the environment that was cultivating the lives of folks who looked like me and low-income individuals. And I differentiate the two of those with intentionality. Just because we may look alike does not mean you're low income, right? And so that caused us to then dig a little deeper on what role could we or should we play as a financial institution, as community financial institution, and as a community designer, so that we could begin to move some of this work into the communities that need it most. So we in earnest got involved and created Go Green Energy, which I shared a moment ago, and some of the impetus for that. But it allows us then to get into neighborhoods and get into communities and both understand some of the challenges. Sometimes they're regulatory, they're legislative, and sometimes they're social. And how can we help move the needle? From there, we did access, so we were awarded by the federal government $156 million to fund a program that's designed to provide free rooftop solar to low-income households across 8 states. I believe we were maybe the only application, perhaps there's one other, that dedicated 100% of this to be free.
Wow.
I think that's part of the pushback. Is a value question that others are asking that we've already answered, and that is, do these communities deserve it? Well, yeah. Yeah. They had to deal with so much. Absolutely. We're not doing favors. I'm trying to backfill what was taken from these communities by lower home appraisals just because of the complexion of the person next door. Like, don't get me started down that path around worth, value, and what's deserved. And so there have been some pauses. The portal is open now, and it opens and closes. And look, here's a reality. Climate mitigation is going to continue to be a global function. The United States is one of the top emitters in the world, and the rest of the developed world, they have goals, and they know that they can't reach those goals unless the United States hits its targets. That means there's an international interest in doing a little bit more until we get our act together here. Corporations are still moving forward with their plans. We continue to look for opportunities to execute on our plan. The reality is it's going to look a little different next year, and it may look different the year after that. But in the spirit of today's conversation, we're resilient, right? We may know the hit's coming, and I always say, look, if I know it's coming, I can brace for it. And so we anticipated this. We'll figure it out. But these communities deserve the investment and more, and they've done so much with so much less. So whenever we have the benefit to see what they can do when given a fair share and a funded, capitalized fair share, man, that makes us want to do that much more of it.
Wow. I love who you are. I love why you're doing what you're doing. It's so beautiful to see. What do you see as the opportunity in this space right now? Despite all the challenges, what's on the horizon for, let's talk about climate justice, and then I want to hear about growth ops and the rest of your work as a whole. But what does the horizon look like?
Coming back to the global conversation, we've known for a long time in analyzing business performance that typically, if you look at the average, if a company only does business in their proverbial backyard, the upside is only so much. The level of high performance, the ceiling gets lowered. And the more they branch out or diversify across a number of different avenues, but geography being one of them, they tend to do better, assuming strong management and they've got the capital to perform. And so we're at a point, if we pull together that international perspective, the opportunities across the globe, this is another time in history where other parts of the world are saying we're better because of the diversity that we have. I was listening to the Bank of America CEO, today saying, we've got a Pathways platform that, over the last 10 years has brought 30,000 students in from diverse backgrounds, and we're better for it. They typically stay in the bank in some way or another. And so there are places that recognize the value. Now, let me take a pause. We don't need others to recognize our value.
Right.
It's when we want to monetize the value that we bring. And that's when there's benefit in looking a little beyond the backyard. So whatever it is that we produce, let's look at that in a broader context. How do we get it on a platform that more folks can buy it, that they can interact with it? We should always be doing that. And at this particular time in the world's history, we've got Europe and Canada and other places who are saying, come here, do business with us. And so I think that's the opportunity. Now, it's maybe 2 steps for one person, and it might be 20 for another. And that's where this equity piece comes in. Even within us, that's where it only means fairness. And diversity, as Alicia Keys told us at the awards, is a gift. Right? And so
I love this. So there's a thing going around right now. It's like, hey, if you're going to say you're anti-DE&I, you actually got to spell it out and tell me which one or all three. Is it diversity? You're up?
Yeah.
Diversity? Okay. How about equity? It's like, okay, inclusion.
Yeah.
So what fundamentally, what in the world are you opposing out of those three things?
Yeah.
Sound like pretty human values, especially in, if I can say, a so-called Christian nation.
Mm-hmm.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, that's right.
Which one of those three or all three, which combination are you actually opposing? Because it doesn't make sense according to what we say we value.
So clearly there's high value to it, right? Clearly there's high value to it. Come back to the vote. Come back to the other things we talked about. If there's so much angst and hatred over it, then clearly it's the treasure, right? Like clearly it's that thing that has immense value. And when we can embrace that and multiply it by how we connect with each other and others who embrace it, then that becomes a train that goes down the tracks in a different way, right? The horn, it toots a little bit differently, and there's a swag. I don't know if you remember Soul Train, right? That train moves a little bit differently, and everybody can get on. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity for us to reconnect not only with the diaspora across the globe, but with others who may see us differently. And to maybe put that into quick historical context, only 10% of the Africans who crossed the transatlantic in the slave trade came to the United States. Wasn't the United States yet, right? But came to this part of the world. Only 10%. Wow. So there are that's just how sinister the treatment of us has been. Only 10%. That means 90% of us have been dispersed elsewhere, a lot in South America, and certainly in some of the island nations. And so there's something to be said about finding each other. There's something to be said about finding good. And when you get to those numbers, right, if you get to those numbers, you can do something incredibly meaningful.
So as we round the corner on this conversation, I know this one could take a couple hours. We're doing this is great. This is great. What does Black liberation mean to you? Right. I feel like we've set a lot of the foundation, and so let's start bringing it home.
What does Black liberation mean to me? Wow. I'll start with the granular, I guess. I'll start on the ground. It's when Black boys and girls and Black men and women can walk down the street and feel free of assault for doing everyday things. It's when a broken taillight doesn't put your life at risk. It's when a mother or a wife's or a sister's prayers, or a father and a brother or son's prayers can go towards something other than praying that their loved one makes it home safe. That's one part of it. Let's step it up from on the ground. Although on the ground is also that love for each other, right? That place is a utopia. The thing that might scare others, that when we find an affinity for it, right? When the sun shines on us, when we find it, that's liberty. And then it's the ability to access the kind of purchasing power, right? The kind of capital that doesn't outrun the atrocities we talked about, right? The African Americans in the top 1% still share their experiences with discrimination and racism and the like. But at a point when you don't have to worry if the lights are going to be on. Your kids have what they need when they go to school, and they can go to school at a place that actually teaches them and prepares them for what's to come. That's liberty. When there's a supreme law of the land and it contemplates us throughout, not beginning with 3/4 and then trying to fit us in later in 13th and 14th Amendments. And those were necessary, but it didn't contemplate us as whole. And so a place where the supreme law of the land has us interwoven, and then the court that governs that land does the same. There's liberty in that. And everything I just shared is largely national. The liberty of being able to explore other places and other ideas and see ourselves in it. My early travels, I can tell you, I took baggage that I shouldn't have taken. I took assumptions that I would be viewed as I'm viewed here in the United States too many times. And I couldn't have been farther from that reality. And I realized that I packed some bags that I should have left at home, right? And so we can learn about ourselves and sharpen ourselves and get better as beings by sometimes getting away from whatever those places are that are an indictment to our limitless abilities. That's Black liberty.
I love that. I was reading something the other day about it's like a bad relationship. You don't know how toxic it is until you're out of it, and then with somebody healthy, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So just even getting out, whether you can physically or not, through literature, there's a lot of different ways that you can explore the world and other ideas other than what's right here in the United States. But getting out of toxic relationships and be like, maybe I don't have to, put up with that or what that is. I think that's beautiful. So tell us what's next for Growth Ops. What's on the horizon for your organization so that we can support you as you continue to lead and charge the path forward.
Thank you for that. What's next for Growth Ops needs to include the folks who are on this line. From Maxie Jackson, early way in, Dave Reynolds, and I'm just going down the line here. Michael, is that
We got
Michael
an active
Crooks?
chat. This is nice.
Right. Jermaine is in here. Some of these folks I know, some I don't. Mambu Sherman, just Walton Smith, Stephen Sims, the fact that folks cared enough, Marvin Gunn, to weigh in tells me that at least today in this conversation, we're seeing each other in this moment, which suggests that there's some moments to come that we can see each other in. And so a future for Growth Ops doesn't exist until we build more of this. So visit us, connect with us is what I'd say is a start. The clean energy piece is the path at which the globe is traveling. So long as we have these effects of climate change, the droughts, the floods, the airplanes dropping 10,000 feet in seconds and rising and dropping, that's all affected by adverse climate events. And so as long as we have these catastrophic storms that are once in 1,000 years that are happening every 2 or 3, then we have to remediate that, right? We got to mitigate that. And so we're not done, is what I tell you. The world's not done on this one, and so we're not done. It doesn't have to be solar. It can be wind. It can be water. It can be tidal and geothermal. It can be all these different things. But what I would say is, if the folks who are listening and viewing are not plugged in, plug in. This is similar to the opportunities that are already behind us that changed lives and changed economies. This is akin to the automobile and the assembly line. This is akin to telecom, the baby bells, as they called them, and even the cell phone and the internet. These are things that everyday citizens across the globe can't live without. Right. And so the opportunities that are embedded inside of there are enormous. Please take a look. If you have questions, come see us. We'll send you to whomever is the right fit for you. We don't have a corner of the market on all the good ideas. But I think there's some good folks out there, and we want to be connected to good people.
That brings up an interesting point as you were talking about just this everyday people. I think that might be part of the resistance to some of this change is that we're talking about like solar production, all these things, decentralizing in some ways power production. And you're coming after some pretty old establishments and roots when you talk about people actually owning their power in all the ways, right? I think that's anyway, so let me not go too far on that because we only got a few minutes. But all right, I want to end the segment with this because I like finding out about folks. What is a little known fact about Michael Jean, something that like you are a karaoke star, you've what is a little known fact, something that you do or a hobby or something that you just happen to be good at or something like that? What you got?
So I'm a finance and economics guy. That's the side of my brain that is kind of always going. But I've had the benefit of singing at stadiums and weddings, and I'm an old crooner, if you will. I like the old Sam Cookes and Luther Vandrosses, and that Stevie Wonder. The further you go back, the more I enjoy that music. I enjoy the songs that not only were the soundtrack for my childhood, but they encouraged us to court and to love, right? They had a melody to them that you could always hop on, and when you hear them again, it just takes you back to those places. And so I'm a big lover of music, jazz included. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, and whenever I can reproduce it, if I think I'm alone, you might hear me singing in the background.
Okay, do you have any music out? Like, have you ever recorded it and put it out, or is this all like, just at home belting it out?
I've helped others record, but I have not recorded. Again, that's just been that little known fact about me, and I've enjoyed the moments that it's provided, the smiles that it puts on people's faces. Music can help you escape sometimes when there's not another door to open, and to see people enjoy that. One of my favorite experiences was on it was on a boat, but not like a super yacht. People paid for a little ticket, and somehow someone told the DJ that I could sing, and so I sang an old song, and this old couple got up and danced like they were in their living room. And before they stood up, I was really trying to just get through the song. But once they got up, I just wanted that song to play for as long as they wanted to dance.
Wow.
And so it's a common thread. This one just has some notes and melodies to it.
I like this. You should have never told me that, Michael. We might have to get you to the conference this year.
I'm feeling the regret already. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Angela, we got a performer for the conference. So this is good. Here, I'm gonna bring Angela out for this. You need to see her. Oh, she don't want to. Okay, she went off camera in the back. All right, Michael, thank you so much for being who you are, for this raw conversation. I think this is needed at a time like this. I'll ask for all of the listeners who tuned in here on LinkedIn Live, the one action that you can take immediately that will help this whole thing is sharing this interview to your social media so that we can cross-pollinate the great work that Michael's doing and everything that we talked about today. These are conversations worth sharing. So hit the share button. That would really help us out as well and amplify the work that Michael's doing. So Michael, thank you again for being who you are, for sharing what you have.
Thank you. Thank you to the Alliance and everyone who's joined us today. Looking forward to what's next together.
All right. And you heard Michael, and he's for real. Reach out to him. He dropped his email. So make sure you connect with Michael Jeans and follow him on LinkedIn. Just a great influential voice that's needed at a time like this. So, and everyone who is here listening, keep changing the world. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for choosing to be here with us today. Talk soon. Bye-bye. This is Black Money.
About economic liberation and freedom.
Critical conversations to invigorate our communities through Black-led CDFIs.
But most importantly, we want people to create wealth.
When we look at our communities, we still see a big disinvestment.
Going from resourceful to resourced.
CDFIs have that high touch. They understand their customers. They know how to reach out to those customers. They stay in touch with those customers.
We are trying to create job makers and not just job takers.
Yeah, I've even heard it said recently that great leaders don't lead from the top down, they lead from the bottom up because they're actually lifting everybody.
We have to do more than just being a regular lender.
Don't give me this story about if I teach you how